Good morning. Today, I'd like to continue talking about how to do vector calculations in coordinate systems that are rotated with respect to others. To get started, I'll draw in the usual x and y coordinate system together with the usual unit circle. Then I'll think of taking the x and y axes and rotating them by an amount theta radians in the counterclockwise direction. Because of the things that we did in trigonometry, the point on the unit circle that corresponds to x equals 1, y equals 0 is now x equal cosine theta, y equals sine theta. The point at the top of the original circle had angle pi over 2 radians, which has now been increased by an amount theta. The x and y coordinates then are x equal cosine pi over 2 plus theta, y equals sine pi over 2 plus theta. Of course, for vectors in standard position, the components of the vector from the origin to a point on the unit circle is simply the x and y coordinates of that point on the unit circle. Any vector in the plane can be written as a combination of the I and j vector that we're used to. Of course, the same could be said of any other pair of vectors that are at right angles to each other and of unit length. We will have, in addition to the I and j vectors, which point out along the original positive x and y axis directions, additional vectors that will point out along the positive new coordinate and other new coordinate. I say it that way because obviously I can't use the letters x and y because they're already being used for something else. Likewise, the vector that points out along these new coordinate axes cannot be called I and j without causing mass confusion. To be even-handed and to make use of the silliness in the turn your crank to Frank video, I'm going to call some of these things crank. I will call one of the things Frank. I'll call one of them knob, and I'll call the other one Bob. As far as my coordinate axes go, I'll call one of them the Reba axis, and the other the Winona axis. There are some people who suspect that the only reason I'm making this video is to make the horrible joke about my new y-axis being the Winona axis. Well, at any rate, I have the x-axis, the y-axis, the Reba axis, and the Winona axis. We are now in a position to turn your crank to Frank, also to turn your knob to Bob. Vector Frank has known components in terms of I and j. Likewise, along the Winona axis, we find vector Bob. Continuing with the silliness, I can write out some equations that relate Frank, crank, knob, and Bob. Don't worry, at the end of the video, we'll go back to using somewhat more serious-looking notation, but in point of fact, Frank, crank, knob, and Bob are perfectly good names. Here are vectors Frank and Bob, written in terms of, really, the I and j vectors. Using trig identities, though, I can easily simplify the expression for Bob This is the simplified version of how to get Bob and Crank from Frank and Knob. I will now go back to calling the vectors more scholarly looking symbols, I and J, for the XY system, and instead of Frank and Bob for the new coordinate system, I'll make up names for vectors that point in those directions as well, U and V. Given these facts, I can express U and V in terms of I and J. It would be convenient if I could do the reverse as well. This turns out to be easy enough to do, just using some algebra and trigonometry. We can also look at the components of a vector in these two different coordinate systems, but we'll save that for another time. Until then, I hope everybody has a good day. I'll talk to you again soon.